Jay Fidell, I'm here. It's 1 o'clock on a Monday afternoon, and we have some great stuff today. You know, I rode up in the elevator, and one of my old buddies said, "Why do you do this?" And I thought, wow, why do I do this? I do this for shows just like this one. I do this for guests just like this one. Ved Nanda, he's a professor. He's the Evans University professor, the Thomas G. Marsh Professor of Law. He's the director of the Ved Nanda Center for International and Comparative Law. He's a founding director of International Legal Studies, and he's at the Sturm College of Law, the faculty there in Denver, Colorado. Welcome to the show, Ved.
Thank you, thank you.
I know
to be with you.
If we went into your complete CV, we'd be here all day.
You're kind.
So they can look you up, all right?
That's all right, absolutely.
But today you agreed graciously to discuss something which, you know, just seems very appropriate, and that is the law, international law, that will evolve in the unique case of ISIL. So first, can you give us your view about how ISIL has burst onto the stage of international law and why it's different, why it's unique than anything the international legal community has seen so far?
I think before even we talk about the ISIL, we need to talk about 9/11.
Okay.
Because that is where it all began.
Okay.
And it all began when 3,000 people in the United States were killed, and we did not realize that it was going to happen. And at that time, for the first time in the United Nations history and in the history of the law on the use of force changed. What happened is that the Security Council of the United Nations, and you may recall it was the French ambassador who was chairing that Security Council meeting, and you may also recall that about the French, we used to say, we are not going to call them French fries, we call them freedom fries.
I remember that.
We don't like
right after 9/11, right?
We don't like the French. And he's the one who at that time called the Security Council meeting, and the Security Council unanimously decided that what happened in 9/11 would permit the United States to use force in self-defense against the Taliban, against those terrorists who had caused this problem. And remember, until then, people like ISIL, all these kind of jihadis or terrorists, they, in the eyes of the law and international law, were simply criminals. And as a good lawyer, you know what happens about criminals. You chase them, you find them, you bring them before the court of law, you charge them, you find them guilty. Once you find them guilty, you punish them. But that's the law enforcement paradigm that we used in order to reach out those people who commit those crimes. Now 9/11 changed all that. The law changed because in self-defense, the United States got the UN blessing of international law to go to Afghanistan, to chase bin Laden, to get rid of the Taliban. That is the beginning of the law change. Now the problem simply is that after that, Al-Qaeda in Iraq, Al-Qaeda in Maghreb, and all these kind of different incarnations. And now the last incarnation being the ISIL. And ISIL is the most extreme of all. And the reason for that is a very simple one, because they are not simply trying to hit the West. They are saying, we want to create a state. It's going to be caliphate. It's going to be Islamic state, and that is the one that is going to rule the world. And the world is going to be ruled by Sharia. And this kind of religious fervor and extremism is what ISIL has brought. And then I think we can go to the question of where international law is going to evolve and what we do about them.
And this is a new threat altogether.
New threat altogether.
This morning I heard that there was an identifiable group of ISIL now in Turkey.
Oh, they are all over. They are in Libya. They are at the present time, you know, you name all these Middle Eastern countries, and they are in Yemen. They are now asking these other countries' jihadis to call themselves the province of ISIL.
Oh.
And that is where they are in Turkey, they are in Egypt, they are in Yemen, they are in Lebanon. They are all over in that part of the Middle East. And what they are trying to do is they are trying to create that kind of worldwide kind of phenomenon where they are saying that for Islamists and for Muslims, we are going to create that caliphate. And so they are not simply frightening people in the West, but even Muslims in all those countries are frightened because they are so extreme.
You're scaring me.
No, that is the reality of today. And so I think the law that you are thinking about, until now what we have, that is the law on the use of force on self-defense. But the law otherwise is the law of war. What happened in Guantanamo, what is happening on torture issues. And all that, as you remember, goes back to Geneva and the Geneva Conventions and the law of war and the International Committee of Red Cross. And they are the ones who had created that law of war. And that law of war was simply for two countries and their armies fighting each other. And you need to take care of the prisoners of war. You need to take care of non-combatants. You need to take care of people who are not fighting. But today, it's not countries fighting, but within the countries. And this one, even beyond the countries, but throughout the world. And this is a non-state actor. And it's not a state. And so the law that was one time drafted, one time made applicable to states, now you're looking at non-state actor.
Who never signed up.
Never signed up. They are not going to be following the law of war. They don't want to follow these conventions. They consider them not simply antiquated, that at times the US said they are, but remember, we're following them. So despite the fact that there was a little kind of glitch, today we are back at that, and Obama has very clearly said that no torture, no waterboarding, and that the Geneva Conventions are the ones that we are following it. But the problem simply is that the International Committee of the Red Cross, that at the present time is the guardian of the law of war, they don't feel that new law is needed. They feel that the law of war that presently we have, these conventions, and you remember there are two types of conventions. One type of convention is what kind of weapons can you possibly outlaw? Because war itself is obscene, killing people is obscene, and to say that you want to kill them humanely makes no sense.
Right.
But at the same time, you do want to see that if there is war, if the people are being killed, at least there are some constraints, some limits on the use of those weapons. And second group of those conventions is as to who, and this is the combatants, non-combatants, prisoners of war, people who are left kind of wounded, shipwrecked, what do you do about them? And so these laws, the International Committee of the Red Cross feels that they are not antiquated, they are okay, that once you go beyond these laws of war, then you've got to think about international human rights law. And today, international human rights law, as part of international law, even reaches out beyond the law of war. So that's where we are, my friend.
Yeah. Can we go back for a minute to Guantanamo?
Yes.
Guantanamo, so we had people on the battlefield. It was a battlefield in Afghanistan, and we captured them, and we brought them to Guantanamo ostensibly to face charges in that old model you described, to have evidence presented, and to have a court convict them, and if convicted, then punished. The problem is that it was hard to identify them on the battlefield. It was hard to prove the case with customary witnesses and testimony and documents. And I think it was essentially flawed from the outset, aside from the whole question of whether it should be Guantanamo or some other venue. But the process of trying to, I guess, convict somebody of questionable crimes. I mean, a war crime is not the same as conducting war. It's different. Guantanamo failed. I mean, it failed in the eyes of pretty much everyone, I would say. What have we learned from Guantanamo that now we can use, if anything, in dealing with ISIL?
Well, what happened is you have been a military judge. You began as a judge. So you understand all that. We have a uniform code of criminal justice. We have all those procedures. What happened in Guantanamo is that we wanted to try those people by military commissions. First of all, we said that in Guantanamo, those people who are there, one, they are Talibans. They were in power at one time, they were a state. So those Taliban prisoners, they are different from Al-Qaeda prisoners. And now they would be different from ISIL prisoners. So that was the state, non-state issue. Then the issue in Guantanamo came that one time when the United States courts and the executive, they had those military commissions. This was an extraordinary measure. You had to show military necessity in order to create those commissions. The charges were against it, critics said, there is no military necessity. Second, how long are you going to keep them there? When the war ends, the law of war says you release them immediately at the cessation of hostilities. Here with Al-Qaeda, it's going to go on. And now with ISIL, it's going to go on. How long are you going to keep them? When does the war end? When can they be freed? And then the question came of procedures, because the procedure that we had under the commissions that initially President Bush had instituted, one, he had said, I delegate the authority, not as the commander-in-chief, he was going to do that. I delegate the authority to my defense person. So Secretary of Defense. Secretary of Defense said, I delegate it to one of the retired brigadier generals or generals. And so there were people who were saying it is not properly constituted. Second, procedures do not permit that you have a person tried under those circumstances, both on evidence and on procedure. So from Guantanamo, we learned at that time that these military commissions need to be modified. So from 2006, we modified them in 2009, then we modified them in 2012. And the sad part is that on those military commissions, as you, former judge, you know, we have not been successful at all. And so people who had been tried by civilian courts at times have been found guilty. And despite our skepticism as to how we are going to prove what kind of evidence are we going to provide, still we have been able to find them guilty, and we have been able to punish them. So I think at this stage, the point simply would be that if you are talking about these people, ISIL and others, and they are brought to us, captured by us, then I think we are still, the jury is out as to how we are going to deal with them. If you talk about ISIL being in the international arena and to have an international tribunal to try them, then you and I can talk about the International Criminal Court, we can talk about those war crimes tribunals, and then we can say, how do you bring them there? What kind of punishment can you give? What kind of charges you can try, give them? And so we can talk about anything you would like to.
And yes, and we may well do that.
Yes.
It strikes me, though, that leaving this part of the program, we have to take a break in a minute, it seems clear that we can't just go back to an earlier way of dealing, because this has got so many new issues in it. And we have to be reasonably effective about it. Justice denied is Justice delayed is justice denied, and justice that has no credibility is justice denied also.
Right.
So we have to figure out a new system for dealing with this at all levels. And so when we come back from this break, Ved, I'd like to explore with you where that might come from, who might do that, and
Wonderful.
how it might be done. It's a really creative experience we're going to have in only 1 minute from now.
All right.
That's Ved Nanda, professor of law at the University of Denver, director of the Ved Nanda Center for International Law. We'll be right back after this short break.
Aloha, I'm Kili'i Akina, president of the Grassroot Institute and host on Ehana Kako, a weekly program on the ThinkTech Hawaii broadcast network. Ehana Kako means let's work together. Think of the sad alternative, let's not work together. Here in Hawaii, with all of our diversity and the richness of the people, it's important for us to come together around issues on the basis of what's right and what's good and what's going to serve the common good. And that's what we try to do at Ehana Kako. Every week, we interview movers and shakers, people in government, business, and other sectors of society to talk about how to create together a better government, economy, a better world here in Hawaii that can bless the rest of the world. I thank you for your attention to ThinkTech Hawaii, and we look forward to seeing you every Monday, 2 to 3 p.m. on the ThinkTech Hawaii Broadcast Network. We're Ehana Kako, and we wish you well. Aloha.
We're live. We're here with Professor Ved Nanda, an international law professor at the University of Denver. And we're talking about what we're going to do, assuming we ever get prisoners out of ISIL, what we're going to do with them. Because ultimately, you know, the future of the world is involved in this. As you mentioned, a caliphate has no boundaries. No. A caliphate could go everywhere, and these guys would like it to go everywhere, and ultimately the world is going to have to deal with it. And that means fisticuffs. That means that we have to stop them physically, and they're pretty nasty fellas. So at that time, when it's on the battlefield, of one kind of battlefield or another, we're going to wind up taking prisoners, because that's our morality. We don't just execute people.
Right.
And so at that point, we can't use Guantanamo. There's too many flaws in what happened there. We have to find another way. This is so interesting. And we have to find a way that's based, forgive me, but based on international law.
Right.
It can't be whole cloth.
No.
It's got to have some foundation. How do you see that unfolding? Complicated.
I think that reminds me again to go back to Nuremberg. Mm-hmm. And Nuremberg is the one that gave us initially a very clear understanding that no impunity, that anyone who commits crimes, from the head of state to anyone, can be found guilty. International law applies to individuals. They are subjects. They are no longer objects. So we began from there, and then, as you remember, Cold War intervened. Nothing happened. For 40-odd years, those clouds of Cold War, they hung high, and the shadow was long. And it continued that the United States and the Soviet Union did not want the international community, the United Nations, to function at all. And then finally, when the Soviet Union, and now dissolved Soviet Union, Russia came into the United Nations. Then we had, as you remember, the Iraq War, the first Gulf War. We had the United Nations functioning. We had the International Criminal Court finally, and we had all these war tribunals. So I think the answer to your question, and we can explore it further, would be that we have individuals having committed those crimes, and those crimes are the atrocity crimes.
Not just being on the battlefield.
No.
It's the beheadings, it's the brutality,
right.
It's the atrocities.
Right. And that is genocide, that is war crimes, that is crime against humanity. And these are, again, torture, beheadings, rapes, killing people that they have done, bombing civilians, all that. But the point simply would be that if, in principle, we can try that non-state actors in the international arena, then I think the major questions are, how do you bring them to The Hague? International Criminal Tribunal, Criminal Court has not been very effective so far. And the reason for that simply is that in principle, the international community has recognized that these crimes must be stopped, must be deterred, must be prevented, and if they are not, then they must be punished, people who have committed those crimes. But despite all that principle, its application at the present time is faulty because the United Nations, the International Criminal Court, does not have Marines to go around and pick those people. They have no enforcement authority.
So what you have to have some kind of collaboration then.
Absolutely.
It doesn't work to say, well, the United States has an interest, the United States cares passionately about stopping these crimes. That's not enough. You have to have a global, or at least the United Nations collaboration to empower that court to enforce this international criminal law. And then you have to have a force that will go out and bring the defendants before the court.
Right. And you need, as you rightly said, that collaboration, that cooperation, that kind of international consensus on it. Today, as you know, what has happened is that on the Iran deal, the Security Council has unanimously endorsed the deal. The international community is behind it. And similarly, the international community has got to be totally behind it. You remember in the past, although at times we feel that international community can't act, sanctions can't work, apartheid in South Africa. And you recall that the reason for all that apartheid to go away is that international multilateral sanctions that were comprehensive, that there were very, very few gaps in it, that they were implemented, applied by everyone around the world, and it succeeded.
Yeah.
And then similarly, this time also, there has to be that kind of consensus, because 193 countries in the United Nations, as you and I were talking about, they are simply, UN is a conglomerate of these nation states. 5 of these major veto-wielding powers are the ones that have got to decide that they want action. And I think then once they do, and they are not going to use the veto, and there is a common interest, then I think it can happen. Now, about ISIL, one thing that ISIL has done is wonderful. Everyone hates it.
Yes. No, and that really changes the way things work, doesn't it?
It's not just the United States. It's not just the West. Iran hates it. Saudi Arabia hates it.
Even China.
Even China hates it. So I think at this stage, you probably have, I think, an appropriate way of saying it, that once they are defeated, or if they are, captured people who are committing those crimes, what do we do about them? So I think my answer to that is that we have, in principle, consensus in the international community that these crimes must be punished. And people who commit these crimes, we must not tolerate their presence. So that consensus has got now to be implemented in action. And for that, I think the proper way is either the International Criminal Court or a special tribunal created to try them, as was you remember the Hague Tribunal for War Crimes in Nuremberg, but after that now, Rwanda.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, and we have done that in sitting in The Hague on Europe, whatever happened in Kosovo.
What do you think is preferable, to use an existing tribunal, an existing system, because the tribunal has presumptively some kind of system, or to create some new system? Now, and I ask that with due regard for the fact that when George W. Bush created the commissions, or recreated the commissions in Guantanamo, he was asking for trouble because it was new. And people find a lot of criticism for anything new. Yes. So wouldn't it be better to have the existing International Criminal Tribunal take jurisdiction of this, take possession of it, and maybe empower them further than they are empowered, so that they can act with greater authority.
Absolutely, they can do that because that is the purpose of that. But if you find that it would be more convenient to have the entire world community on board, because the International Criminal Court at the present time is tied up with all those cases out of Africa, then you can probably, through the Security Council, which has got a mandate to create these kind of tribunals. We created the tribunal for Kosovo, we created tribunal, Croatian, Bosnians, all of them have been tried. Rwanda tribunal is there, Lebanon tribunal is there. For East Timor, we had a tribunal. So we can create a special tribunal.
And the argument would be is special situations require special tribunals.
And we can do that. And I think the point here would be that the charges would be, as you rightly said, war crimes, crimes against humanity. And for example, in the case of Yazidis, when the ISIL people went after them on the mountain and killed so many of them, took many of those women, and raped them and married them to their own jihadis. I think the point simply was that at that time they even said they want to get rid of all Yazidis. So that could be even genocide. So genocide, war crimes, crimes against humanity, these would be charges. And for them, you could create a special tribunal, or you could give the International Criminal Court the opportunity to do that. The only reason why I would say not the International Criminal Court is that the U.S. is not a party to it. Russia is not a party to it. China
why are
is
we not a party to it?
Because we had felt that many Americans, because they are the most peacekeepers around the world, and the jurisdiction of the court is that any country in which those crimes allegedly have been committed has the right to send those people to The Hague. And America said that we don't
want to retain jurisdiction. We don't want to submit to this other court. Yeah. But maybe now they have to.
Yeah, they do.
We do.
And then I think the point simply would be that if we create that kind of new court, and the Security Council permits that, and I think Russia and China are on board on it, then I think we can try these people in the new setting in that court. And at the same time, as you remember, I mentioned about the first 9/11, that on the use of force, we have now the UN blessing that in a situation like this, force can be used in self-defense. Although here you can probably raise another question, and that is the use of drones permitted? Can we simply go and target people in Yemen, in other parts of the world, in Syria?
As a way for example, the U.S. to conduct war, to I don't want to use the word assassinate, but take out a given...
eliminate people.
Eliminate people.
Yeah.
And I mean, there's a huge ethical, moral issue involved in all that.
And then we, you know, at the present time, again, the jury is out on it.
Yeah.
There are some who would consider that not an action in self-defense, but you can very, very easily argue that those people who at the present time either have committed those crimes against the U.S. or who are threatening the U.S. that they are going to continue to commit those crimes against the U.S. because they have been saying we are going to strike at the U.S.
Make public statements.
And public statements all the time. So those people we can use in self-defense under the UN Charter, and Article 51 of the UN Charter permits self-defense, and self-defense as an inherent right. And as you know, the point simply is that if there is a person with a gun in his hand pointing at you, trigger is not pulled, but the gun is pointed at you and has said, I'm going to shoot you. Can't you take action in self-defense? And here, all that you have to show is imminent threat.
Yeah.
And once you have shown
that's the law now, I suppose, in
you can do
most places in the world, theoretically.
Yeah.
Let's take a short break, but what occurs to me about this is that we're going to have to do a certain amount of reinvention on defining exactly what we mean by crimes, on defining how to try a person in absentia and punish him in absentia. These are new concepts.
Yeah.
And we're inventing them here today. Ved Nanda and me, here on ThinkTech Hawaii. We'll come back in 1 minute, and we'll give you even more detail about how this can be done. We'll be right back.
Aloha, how you doing? I'm Gordo the Tech Czar, here on ThinkTech Hawaii, where we co-host Hibachi Talk, where we talk about technology and bring in all kinds of cool guests. Also, my co-host with me today is
Andrew the security guy. Thanks for watching. Thanks for watching ThinkTech Hawaii, and thanks for watching Hibachi Talk. We also have Angus.
Hello there, lad. It's Angus. I bring in all kinds of wee things. Oh, look, you can see my lips moving.
Hi, I'm Chris Leatham, and I'd like to invite you to come and watch my show every Wednesday at 3. I'm interested in a variety of issues that have to do with politics and our local business economy. And I'd like to bring on guests who like to talk about everything from technology to social media to what we can be doing to improve our environment. And so I'd like to invite you every Wednesday at 3 to stay and watch my show here with ThinkTech Hawaii. And I'll see you there.
Okay, we're back. We're live. We're here with Ved Nanda, professor of law, international law at University of Denver, and he's the director of the Ved Nanda Center for International Law. And we are exploring, what do I say? We're exploring the envelope, the edges of the envelope in international law, but trying to somehow get current with what's going on in ISIL. ISIL, you know, as far as the public consciousness is concerned, is barely a year or two old. We don't fully understand it yet. We don't understand the motivations, and we don't understand the, internecine way it works. We don't understand. We cannot see exactly where it's going to go, but we are threatened for sure. We, meaning the whole world. So I want to give you a 2-year sabbatical. Ed. Okay.
I accept it.
Okay, and in this time, we'll pay you well. And in this time, we would like you to take the steps necessary to figure out how the international legal community, including whatever agencies exist or could exist, can galvanize itself around the threat and deal with it both on a moral level, a legal level, and a practical level to try to stop these people from doing what they're doing. So day one, what do you do?
Day one, I want to look at the contract.
Like any lawyer.
You're a good lawyer. Show me the contract and see that I like it.
Yeah.
Assuming I do.
Yeah.
Assuming I do. Then I think...
I promise it'll be a good contract.
Wonderful. But I have always learned, trust but verify.
True. So, what's his name? Kerry is learning that too.
So I think what you need to do is, the nicest thing, as I said about ISIL, is from our perspective, that everyone hates them.
Yeah.
Now, the areas that they are under their control, and those areas are, you start from Baghdad, and you go to Syria, and you look at all that kind of belt, and it's all Sunni belt. So I think what I would do is, because you have given me only the mandate about the legal setting, but on the policy setting, what I would probably do is find a way to see that Sunnis are on board with the United States and the United States allies, so that we do not alienate them and we bring them together in order to fight against the ISIL.
Yeah.
But that is the policy issue. Yeah. If you had given me the policy part, I would start with that.
Yeah.
But you have given me the legal part.
Okay.
So in the legal part, what I would do is, very first thing that I would do is that these 5 major powers that have so far given a very clear indication that none of them likes ISIL, all of them would like to see that ISIL is degraded, as Obama said, and ISIL is eliminated. So all these 5 powers need to be contacted. Each one has got to say that they are on board in order to do what you want to do. That people who are captured, that they must be tried, charges must be brought against them. So these 5 powers, I would like to know from them, would they like to have the International Criminal Court or would they like to have a new tribunal created? I would like to see that the United States does not take the lead in setting the tribunal. I would probably like, out of these powers, either France and Britain to do that, or Russia along with one of those powers to do that, or China with one of those powers to do that. So I would like to see a draft initially of a tribunal or special kind of mandate to the International Criminal Court, especially to try them. They don't need a mandate, they already have it, but a resolution of the Security Council, especially to try them and to charge ISIL people who have been beheading and who have committed those crimes. And I would like these 5 powers to agree that they have got these 3 charges: war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide.
All of which have basis in international law.
Total basis. And
Yeah.
as a good lawyer, as you know, we can't try anybody unless all those elements of the crime are very, very precisely defined.
Yeah.
They are at the present time. In Nuremberg, they were not. But today we have got treaty on torture, we've got treaty on genocide, we've got all these other areas defined today. And they have been defined with precision and with very detailed kind of all those elements mentioned in all these kind of treaties. So that is the very first thing I would do.
Now, what is the role of the United Nations in this step? Is this the organization from which the authority springs, or is it some other way to put them together?
Either way, because, you know, International Criminal Court, the United Nations took the lead. But in Rome, when it was set, it was a statute. All these countries that came together under the UN auspices, but they did not create it under the UN because of, again, you initially had mentioned about the veto and the problem with the veto.
Yes.
And so many of the developing countries, they did not want the Security Council to have total control over it. So they created that International Criminal Court as a tribunal without the United Nations being the umbrella body running it. So I think I would probably go either way, but I would let these 5 powers initially determine what they would like to see happen. Then, after that, I would like to see like-minded groups, and there are plenty of them, because as you look at Norway, Sweden, Denmark, as you look at many countries, even in Latin America and in Africa, India, Japan, Germany, although they are not part of the Security Council, but these countries have got a great deal of reservoir of goodwill in the international arena. So the next step that I would do after the Security Council's 5 permanent members is to have a group of like-minded countries also on board. And once that happens, then I would like the Secretariat of the United Nations to help me in drafting that kind of thing so that there is that tribunal which has got appropriate jurisdiction, it has got all the procedures, it has got both the civil law and common law countries agree upon that, and based upon that, I would have a framework that I would take without a great deal of delay in putting it all together, because those pieces are already there in different places. Simply, you've got to assemble it, you've got to see that countries agree to it, and agree to implement it, agree to enforce it. And once that happens, then, my Lord, what you wanted me to do, I have done. And now that I have done it, I want to see that you do deliver on the contract that you gave me for 2 years.
Okay, there's two pieces I'd like to ask you about.
Yes.
Not to say whether this is inherently part of the assignment or not, but they do spring forth. One is, it's not necessarily an order of importance, but one is the difficulty of prosecuting someone who is anonymous, who wears a black hat, who isolates people by the seashore, rather beheads people by the seashore without being able to identify. and the only people around him are either they've been beheaded or they are part of his group, so nobody is going to be available to testify. How do you make a case in any court if you don't have evidence?
And the point simply is that here you do need intelligence. And you, again, having been in the military, I think human intelligence is exceptionally, exceptionally important. To tell me that from the ISIL itself, we can't have some of those defectors, despite all these 193 countries working together, I won't believe that. So I think there are people who can identify them. There are people who will be able to do that because, as you know, we're not going to punish any innocent people.
Yes.
And alleged kind of offender doesn't mean anything. We need to see that at least people that we are punishing are the ones who committed those crimes. So despite all those difficulties that you have mentioned, and they are enormous, we'll have to find a way to identify people who have committed those crimes.
Yes, and actually that goes to my last question I want to ask you, but just to carry forward, so yes, we need police work, we need intelligence work, otherwise we can't prosecute by any acceptable, morally acceptable model for prosecution of crimes. The second thing that comes to mind is the enforcement aspect. If I see a video of dozens of people being beheaded along the seacoast in Libya, wherever that happened, and I know that this event took place, I say to myself, the world cannot tolerate this.
Right.
We are going to go to Libya or wherever this happened, and we are going to use whatever force we need to use on the ground, on the boots on the ground, and we are going to find these culprits using good police work, and we are going to bring them to justice wherever that may be, or we're going to try them in absentia if there are rules to permit that. Okay, who is going to do that? As you said before, it can't be the U.S. alone.
No.
It's got to be a consortium.
Yeah, and I think that is where the job that you gave me, I started with the 5 permanent members. I broadened it to like-minded countries. Then I broadened it to 193 countries. And your message that you gave, collaboration, cooperation, consensus, that is absolutely essential. And here I think the basis for that is very clear. Everybody hates them. So I think the point simply is that we can create that kind of setting in which we can bring those people who have committed crimes against humanity and a blot on humanity to task, and we need to do that.
Would you include the death penalty?
I will not include that.
But that's a personal choice.
That's my personal choice.
Let me go to my last question now, and it's something about how everyone hates them. You know, you've studied much about human interaction, national interaction, civilizational interaction in your work over the years, and you've seen a lot. And the question I put to you is, this is really a new model, what ISIL is doing. Nobody likes them. And certainly the people under them don't like them.
No.
So how can this be sustainable as a way to govern? I mean, even the Nazis lost the support of their own people over time. And you find in many repressive regimes, they are not sustainable because they are losing the support of those who must support them for them to continue. And so the question I put to you is, after all this work, 2 years of work I give you, could it be possible, okay, that ISIL will fail of its own?
ISIL will fail of its own, but the point simply is that their ideology and that religious fervor, it at the present time is attracting young people, not simply in the Middle Eastern countries, but in Europe, in the United States, because we have not been able to give an equal kind of responsibility to people who are working in media. You are the one who is savvy about the media. We have not been able to give that message. Their message still carries. So I think although they are the ones who of their own weight they're going to probably fail. But I think we need to help them fail by using the media and using these messages that we have not been able to give. And I think, unfortunately, even in the US, with all these agencies fighting over who has the responsibility and turf wars, we are not able to get along in giving that kind of very, very strong message that these are people, I don't want to use the word evil, but they really are. And that message has got to go out. So I think they'll fail because they will fail. They cannot succeed, but we need to hasten their failure by doing the work that we need to do and we are not doing.
That's a perfect answer to my question. Thank you, Ved.
Thank you.
It's wonderful to have you on the
Thank
show.
you
Thank
very
you so
much.
much.
Thank you.
Now, listen to what he said. This is very important. Ved Nanda, he's the professor of law, international law, University of Denver, director of the Ved Nanda Center for International Law. We so enjoy having him here.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.